So I think what the book goes to, what V.S. Ramachandran's work, what he's well known for, is to be able to use a very simple illusion to treat patients with these so-called phantom pains. That's the name of the book, Phantoms in the Brain. The idea that there are amputees who have a scratch in the limb they don't have. Right? How is that even possible? So first is the mystery, how is that even possible? And then the even more incredible idea that you could actually solve that. This is a phantom pain, imaginary pain, and then you could still use something real to solve that. And in that case, it was a very neat and very simple idea of using mirrors to sort of trick the brain again. So treating an illusion with an illusion, with what was for me a very engineering perspective. So that was very profound, and that made me realize that the same mathematical engineering perspective, which I guess I was naturally inclined to at that point, could also be applied to something like the brain and the mind.
Hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of ContraMinds. In this episode, I am talking to Sai Gaddam. Sai Gaddam is the founder of Comini Learning. Sai has had a stellar academic career. He's graduated from the IIT, he's done his master's in neuroscience from the US, and paradoxically, he is now building an alternative learning model, a micro school, which is what Comini Learning is all about. I began my conversation with Sai on his early years, the people who inspired him, the books that he read, and what are the concepts that stuck to his mind for life. We then spoke about the current education system, what ails the current education system, and what are the challenges the kids go through in schools and colleges, and does it even prepare them for the real world. Sai spoke to me about the importance of ambiguity, chaos, and decision-making, which every learning methodology and model needs to incorporate to prepare these kids for the real world. We also spoke about what learning is all about, the definition of learning, and how learning needs to transform the mind. We then spoke about the importance of every kid being unique and therefore the need for personalized learning. We spoke about the application of AI and how he's building a micro school in a box. The importance of hiring and how do you find teachers to build this alternative learning model and scale it is something that we spoke about. Over to my conversation with Sai. Today's episode is proudly brought to you by Effortless. Effortless is the ultimate solution for startups and SMBs seeking seamless money management and compliance handling. Effortless wasn't just created by anyone. It was crafted by chartered accountant turned entrepreneurs who understand the pulse of startups and SMBs. Visit www.goeffortless.ai and embark on a journey that will redefine the way you do business. So Sai, given what you're doing today, uh, how did this journey happen and what was the tipping point for you to take whatever decisions that you've taken till date? So how has it happened and can you tell me your backstory, where it all began and how did it happen?
Sure. So I'm in the education space now. My wife Priyanka and I ran a micro school in Bombay. Also a neuroscientist by training. I've written a couple of books. The most recent one being Journey of the Mind. And then before that, I was an engineer. I graduated from IIT Madras a long time back. So I'd say that if I have to try and find a pattern, it is that a bunch of semi-reckless decisions, one leading to the other, and they all worked out. So I grew up in Hyderabad. I went on to do my undergrad at IIT Madras in electrical engineering. Discovered neuroscience in my final year there thanks to this amazing book, Phantoms of the Brain by V.S. Ramachandran. That is what led me to take up neuroscience. It's been 22 years now since I've gone down that path. Did a PhD, went on to write these books, then was an entrepreneur. Came back to India. This was, PhD was in Boston University. Was very fortunate to have landed up there for reasons I guess we'll go into later. For me, it was just a very random choice when I did make that choice. But anyway, so did that, came back to India, worked on a second book, I've done some consulting work, I've been an entrepreneur for more than 10 years now. And what we're doing now, this is the latest version. This is finally, I think, where all the diversions and excursions and interests intersect, and it's a happy place to be for me.
Fantastic. So, what did V.S. Ramchandran's book, The Phantom of the Brain, what did it do to you? So, what was really the trigger that got you interested in something like this?
I think it was the first book that helped me realize that if you think about the biology and the brain, so especially if you've done conventional schooling in India, there's a sense that it's very taxonomic, very fact-oriented, that you have to know the taxonomy, you have to know all the facts, you have to know where things are, and that's the foundation. I think that was the first book to reveal that actually there's a functional way of looking at the brain, right, which is very, very, very close to how an engineer would imagine a system, right? There are things that happen, there are functions, things go right, things go wrong. So it's not about the specific names of different brain regions or whatever it is. What matters is how are things being done. And then to be able to put that to use. So I think what the book goes to, what V.S. Ramchandran's work, what he's well known for, is to be able to use a very simple illusion to treat patients with these so-called phantom pains. That's the name of the book, Phantoms in the Brain. The idea that there are amputees who have a scratch in a limb they don't have, right? How is that even possible? So first is the mystery, how is that even possible? And then the even more incredible idea that you could actually solve that. This is a phantom pain, an imaginary pain, and then you could still use something real to solve that. And in that case, it was a very neat and very simple idea of using mirrors to sort of trick the brain again. So treating an illusion with an illusion, with what was for me a very engineering perspective. So that was very profound, and that made me realize that the same mathematical engineering perspective, which I guess I was naturally inclined to at that point, could also be applied to something like the brain and the mind.
Okay. So, what is it like, after having done neuroscience and actually done engineering, and now you are a teacher, right? So, how is that transition been, and what's it taught you?
I find education fascinating. So it started off as a reaction to seeing what the system was like when. So we have two kids, a daughter and a son. They're 8 and 4 now. So this started when when the pandemic happened. Education, or what passed for education, came online, and we saw what that was about. And this was the same time I was working on a book as well, Journey of the Mind, where we're looking at the mind from a very theoretical angle. But if you think about it, education is really about transforming the mind, right? It's a very practical application of that. So while I was doing this on the side, which is this theoretical approach to, okay, what is thinking, there was a very practical approach to education, a very flawed one that was unfolding in front of me. So that got us thinking about education, got us thinking about, again, we also happened to move to Bombay at that time, started looking for schools, didn't find any. And then they were like, okay, so this is a great time to put all that theory to use. That's how this journey into education came to be. At the same time, actually, so stepping back a little, we were also working on, we still have that app. We have an app for helping kids learn to read. That was the first step, saying that, okay, so there's so many things about learning, right? If you think about foundational aspects of learning, one is learning to read, the other is learning to do math. We have a long history of educational initiatives, educational ideas, but very little about how the brain works and therefore how that can be used to make things better. So that was the genesis. Then that led to this deep dive into all of education itself, early education. And for me, I think the background, both having been an engineer, bringing an analytical perspective, being a neuroscientist, but not your typical neuroscientist with so neuroscience is a vast field, and so much of that is, I would say, still very taxonomic, right? But in a more advanced version, where for the last 20 years, at least when I was a grad student and after that, the most dominant theme in neuroscience was, okay, what brain region lights up when this particular thing happens, which gives us a false sense of understanding. And this is a metaphor I love to use. It's sort of like aliens coming, looking at the world and then saying, hey, we understand how ravioli or sambar are made. They're made in the kitchen, right? They're made in a little room that we call the kitchen, which sounds like you know something, but that we are nowhere closer to understanding how those are actually made. And so there was this happening in neuroscience, still is in many ways, this taxonomic perspective, but I was incredibly fortunate to have been exposed to a functional perspective, which is what exactly is it doing? Forget all the names, forget everything else. But what's happening when we're trying to learn? What's happening when we're trying to do something? What's happening when we're trying to remember, see? And being able to then apply all of this to education. For me, I think that's been revelatory. It's been fascinating. We're 2 years in, and it's still so much learning going on. Still figuring out. Okay, wow. So there are layers to this, right? We can keep unpacking things. Yeah. So I think that's how it's informed us.
So Sai, so when I look at your, education, you are fairly successful, right? Because you've been in IIT, you've gone to the US, you've studied there. So if I put it from the traditional template of education, whatever was the education system, you've been very, very successful, right? So therefore, given the fact that you're successful in whatever templates that are currently running today, right? And the template that you are now looking to change as a part of Comini Learning that you have, how do you see it different, and what do you see are the challenges? Because at one end you have been so successful in the old template, right? If you are not somebody who said, oh, I'm a dropout, and I did not go to the school, you've been fairly really successful in the old template, right? If I were to call it the current template, right? So what does that mean to what you're doing today? Because that's worked very well, right? So therefore, how does it change given the new framework that you're building?
I think that's a great tragedy of our education system, that someone who went down that path could be considered a success. I was very successful at one thing, which was, I think, cracking exams and doing well in standardized exams. And that did get me quite the distance, but it also shielded me from real world and reality for a very long time, almost 30 years. And I mean, I almost have to laugh or maybe cry and look back and say that we have a system that shields you from the real world, creates a very artificial world where the things that matter are very, very different from what matters in the real world, right? So your exams don't matter at all in the real world, right? What matters is whether you can get the job done. Our education system started off as a proxy for getting the job done, but that was in the industrial age. And the real world has evolved and moved on very quickly, but the world of education is not. And it's I think very sad that we still have the system where, so tens of lakhs of Indians go through these competitive treadmills, whether it's IIT, IAS, spending 4 or 5 years, kids start as young as 6, going through all of that. Of course, when you go through that, you come up with any test, you will have people who excel at that, who probably have other abilities as well. And I don't think it's a merit of the system itself. It's just that you're just literally dumping tens of millions of people through a filter, and you're going to get someone out of there. You are going to get true positives no matter what. So the system, I think, having gone through that, having been on the inside and seeing very closely what it can and cannot do, really helped me realize that education, especially now, is the conventional system that we have is very separate from what is required for the new world. The new world values something else. It requires us to understand and be comfortable with ambiguity, with chaos even, with understanding how to make decisions, how to work in that. Whereas the schooling system that we have is very deterministic. It teaches you. And in my case, having gone through these multiple steps, at least for the first 25, 30 years of my life, was telling me that, life comes as a series of neatly defined packaged problems, and all you have to do is solve that and you cracked it in life, which is absolutely not the case. And I think having gone through that, then having spent 30 years within that system, I say 30 because, while the PhD does open you up to some of the ambiguities, you're still within academia. And academia is still far removed from the real world. So having gone through that and then finally exiting that and then saying, oh my God, the real world is nothing like the model, or at least the distant model we have there. That really opened up my eyes. So I think even before we had kids, there was this vague notion that we can't have this education system. But of course, I didn't really have any skin in the game. But after kids, that became especially a pressing problem. Right? So yes, I think that being on the inside really helped see the flaws up close.
So you keep using this word that we know what the education system can do and cannot do, and therefore you are building an alternate model. At least you are experimenting trying to build an alternate model. So what do you think the current education system can do and cannot do, and what do you think that you are building uh, can do and cannot do?
So one is, I think, the very fact that this is a system that is being set up with very well-meaning intentions to work for everyone. I think the problem starts right there, right? And this is very linked to our ideas about what learning is. So only now are we realizing what learning looks like inside the brain, inside the mind. Uh, but earlier the idea was, you could train someone, and that training process could be very standardized, and therefore you could apply that to every individual. So this was in fact a paradigm in neuroscience. Behaviorism was very much like that, right? You could come up with a behavioral paradigm, you could come up with an input-output mechanism, train someone, and then at the end of it, you have someone who's ready to do something. Whether that's a human or a rat in a lab, they're ready to do that. That worked in the industrial era when people you needed, the vocational skills you needed, were largely standardized. But the fact is that we're all unique, and the system does not take that into account. And the system, given its intentions that it should work for everyone, makes it especially hard, because if everyone is so unique in the way they approach learning, in their attitude towards learning, and how they learn, having one system for everyone just does not make sense, right? So first is understanding and being humbled by the sheer immense problem that is to take on a system. We're not trying to change the system. We're trying to change it from the bottom up in a very localized way. And that localizes, okay, for our kids in this small community. And that's a problem that we can tackle, and it's a much more well-defined problem. It's not the abstract problem of solving education, but it's a very real problem of seeing what are these kids interested in? What do they want to learn? What are their attitudes, and how can we best enable this learning? So that makes the problem very real. And I think that having this localized approach is the greatest advantage that what we do brings.
So when you say you take a localized approach, and when you say what do these kids want to learn, uh, can you enumerate uh, how do people learn? How do kids learn? And if you can tell me what are the fundamental mental models of what you have seen as uh, the best form of learning, uh, and how it is so different from the traditional form of learning. So if you can talk about that, and how does it actually work in the brain? So if you're really looking at learning, how is it this form of learning is very, very different from the traditional form of learning?
So that is a very the answer is a vast one. I think the question is I think deceptively simple. So what is learning? So learning is everything that enables us to successfully navigate life. Learning is self-expansion for us, and that is very interesting. It's an interesting perspective, because you could say that in the older model, the self is fixed, right? It is you're then acquiring certain skills, but in this perspective, I think learning is enabling you to change yourself, to be better equipped to navigate the world, to change the world even. So that is very abstract, and it's necessarily abstract because learning is so vast. Learning is for picking up specific skills. Learning is about attitudes. Learning is about conceptual understanding as well as technical know-how. So there's no one answer to this. So it's really okay. Learning is life itself, right? And what's different about us is that we don't drop out of the womb with a ready set of skills. They have to be acquired, right? We are completely and utterly helpless for the first couple of years of our life. We need a lot of literal hand-holding initially, and later on, I think that transitions into giving gentle nudges. But we're always in the process of discovering what the world is, and we have to figure out that balance of understanding what is the system we inhabit, right? Understanding how our world works, and this is always changing, right? So we all live within flawed systems. It doesn't mean that we just stop and try to write every flawed system. Systems are fundamentally they're there because there's so many different things that are happening. So once you're within that, how do you navigate that? What parts of it can you change if you want to? How do you become aware of that? Everything that enables that is learning. And I think that the contrast here is that in the conventional system, learning is, at least the way most people see it, is very vocational. It is what allows us to get a particular job or a particular career path. Here we're saying that no, that's anyway the world is changing. It's a very different world from the one that parents inhabited and had successful careers, stable jobs in the same place for 40 years. That's gone. That world is no longer there, right? So what is this new world? How can we equip ourselves with the skills to both navigate this world and learn continuously?
So, in Comini Learning, how do you really approach this problem? Uh, what are the steps that you are taking to get the kids to be learning what they are interested in, and how do you even discover what they are interested in?
So kids change really, really fast, which means that what they're interested in changes pretty much, I think, week to week, month to month. So the metaphor we really like to use as our guiding metaphor is that so learning happens on a vast landscape of possibilities, right? Kids could be interested in math, kids could be interested in music, kids are interested in gaming, kids are interested in figuring out how to do handholds or stand upside down, could be whatever, right? And this is because it is literally them learning with their minds and bodies of how to navigate the world, navigate the literal world as well as the world of systems, the world of concepts, right? So our job is to say that first is the belief that kids can actually learn on their own. So we are here. I mean, where we are truly exceptional as a species is that ability to learn from each other, and that we are wired with it, right? So we're born with that. It's not like we have to teach someone; they learn on their own. So, but of course, when you show them a certain path, it can become easier. And this is where the metaphor helps, right? So if the central metaphor is that learning is the exploration of this vast landscape of possibilities. What is our role as educators or teachers? So we are not there to say we are guiding them on this landscape, but we are not strict guides. We're not saying that this is the only path you can take on that. We are actually acknowledging that there are many paths that even we ourselves don't know, right? But we are here to tell you that, hey, these paths have been navigated by people who have come before us. There's certain things that you can find on these paths, certain interesting things. And here's what you can get out of that. And we're also here to say that, okay, so there are perhaps some dangerous paths. Dangers could be, risk to body if they're trying something. It could be exposure to something that's not necessarily appropriate at this age, right? Again, that's a balance. Like, who are we to decide that? It has to be a collective decision. But in this worldview, we are gentle guides who are there to nudge them along the way. So the phrase that often used in education is something that resonates with us is, we are guides on the side. We are not the sage on the stage, right? We are not here to say that we know everything and we're here to impart education. We're here to instill knowledge. We're saying that we are learning along the way. We happen to have a few more yards and years than you, and therefore we have that experience that can help. But truly, no one knows anything. That's the idea.
How does the classroom look like in Comini? So I am, if I have a kid, and if I were to, get you, get the kid into your school. So how does the class look like? Because to me, it looks abstract from whatever you're telling me, and me as a parent, I would like to know how is my kid progressing. Does he know addition? Does he know subtraction? Does he know multiplication tables? Does he know grammar? Okay, so these are the worry that I have as a parent, because that's really what I believe gets tested as the kid grows, wanting to go to college and things like that. So clearly, how do you really then prepare the kids for the real world? Because obviously that's the real world that's out there, right?
It's one aspect of the real world, which is that we have these competitive exams. That's changing too, and I assume that I'm willing to bet as well that with the way AI is progressing, that's going to change dramatically, because we already have AIs that within 2 years of ChatGPT coming along are already cracking the most sophisticated exams that can be given to them. But that's happening. But even without that, I think, yes, competitive exams are a reality, but a very small part of reality. The larger part of reality is the world itself. So our job is to help them model the world, understand the world, understand themselves, and therefore our classrooms have to mimic that in a certain way. So in your conventional school, classrooms, it's very interesting how philosophy informs the structural design itself. If your philosophy of learning is that this is knowledge to be instilled, that means that it's one directional. The classroom that you have is one where the teacher is by the blackboard and your class on one side. Literally, the design itself is shaped by that philosophy. Here, the philosophy is that that's not true. We have guides on the side. That means that there's no such structure. It's a very flexible one. So we have a lot of free play where kids are doing whatever, but we also have guided activities where the kids come together as groups. They don't sit at desks. We sit around. There's a facilitator or educator. And depending on the activity, the space is used that way. Sometimes it's desks if they have to be done at desks. But the point being that there's no single fixed structural design that is used for this, right? So the classrooms, when you talk about how they look, it's that it's free form, right? So we have these spaces, we have a library, we have music spaces, we have spaces for the kid to run around. In Bombay, we have to be very creative because obviously spaces are premium. But we manage that, right? So it's not your typical classroom. Now, when it comes to testing, this is again very interesting, right? 2 years down, we're realizing that, hey, you know what? It's true. Kids need to know this stuff. Again, now when we say need to know, there are certain basics. The assumption made in conventional schooling again is that the kid has to be well-rounded, which for some reason now that's lost in the mists of time also means that they have to understand chirality in chemistry and geodesic plates or whatever in geography, even though that without any meaning or relevance is just a bag of facts, right? So we're not saying that, but we do understand that kids have to take their exams, they have to go down a certain path. But then what we're questioning is, does that have to be done in a very standardized path, where every kid is trying to do something by a certain age? So like you said, the natural anxiety a lot of parents have is, hey, my kid is 6 but not able to string together or recognize 4-letter words, right? This is the kind of anxiety that's been instilled by the system. And if you step back and you look at, okay, what does neuroscience tell us about learning? We realize that outside of learning to speak, which has a critical plasticity, what that means is that if you don't learn to speak by a certain age, it is very, very hard to pick that up, right? But every single one of us learns to speak simply because we're immersed in that. But when it comes to things like learning to read or learning to add up numbers, learning to do math, there is no critical plasticity. What it means is that there's no sensitive period by which you must master multiplication. There's no sensitive period by which you must master addition. In fact, it is counterproductive to try and introduce that early on because it does something profound. Instead of, the kids might learn it with the same behavioral Skinnerian mechanism that, hey, let's beat this kid into submission into learning that, right? So they know the multiplication tables. So they'll be able to parrot that. But what you have is a very shallow level understanding and a deeper and a very profound dissatisfaction with this, right? And that goes on in life. So math phobia is something that so many of us are aware of. And math phobia exists because this has happened. Kids have been exposed to these abstractions too early in life. They've learned to fear them, right? And that's the sort of counterproductive learning we don't want. So what we're seeing again and again, and this is, of course, we're only 2 years old, but we can see how alternative schooling pathways have looked for kids who have taken them. Sudbury is a very great example. Sudbury School is a democratic school in the US. Summerhill in the UK. They've existed for 70, 80 years now. And one thing that you learn from them is that, what matters are the fundamental aspects of learning, which is not these superficial topics like addition or multiplication, but your attitudes towards learning. Things like, are you able to stick to something? Do you have the working memory? Do you have the critical thinking to be able to question something? Once that is there, and you can build on that very easily. So, and this is something, homeschoolers will tell you again and again, democratic schoolers will tell you again and again. Once someone is ready, and that means both in terms of their mindset, in terms of their attitude, in terms of their developmental age as well, they can just breeze through things. So you can take an 11-year-old, and even if that kid has not learned to read by then, once exposed to reading, when it's ready, you'll just pick it up right away. So a lot of these fears are very unfounded. So for us, our job, as we realize, is to keep telling parents about this, right? You don't have to worry about this, right? Your kid has all the machinery required. They will pick it up. It's just a question of when. But it's counterproductive to try and squeeze everyone into the same bucket and say, you must finish this by this age, you must finish this by that age. So to come back to how we deal with this, yes, we absolutely understand that you have assessments to do, but we are not very worried or at all worried about saying that, okay, that must mean that we have assessments every year. Yeah, they have it when they do grade 10 or grade 8, that's fine. And we'll get them ready for that, right? Before that, there's all of life itself for them to explore, all of fundamental skills and traits to be acquired.
So how do you teach them these fundamental traits? Because uh, that's very qualitative in nature, right? So therefore, dealing with ambiguity is what you talked about. Okay, chaos is something that the world is all about chaos, and therefore you need to navigate chaos, right? So these are some of the things that kids have to learn, but the schools don't teach them. Or for example, failure, okay, is something that kids have to be taught, because you go through failure in anything that you do, because you're not going to be you're not going to be first rank or the best, the topper every time, right? So therefore, learning failure and coping with failure is a very, very interesting I would say pivot in terms of learning. So in the classroom, how do you teach it to the kids? Because if you really ask me, I saw an interesting post that you had put up saying that this whole endless cycle of assessments, okay, is really what is creating the problem, right? But then the endless cycle of assessments is really what the best IITians have come out of. The best IIMs have created the best, the management graduates. They're all in top jobs today, right? So therefore, the endless cycle of assessments has indeed created some successful people. So therefore, how do you see it counter to what is needed in the, maybe the knowledge economy, or the the sharing economy, or whatever that we would call it? That's really the new craft economy that we are talking, which is coming in with the AI. So from the industrial age to the craft economy, if I were to call it, uh, how does this have to change? Because frankly, me as a parent, I'm actually saying that, hey, he's among the top 10 percentile of the class. He's doing very well. He's moving to a school. So clearly, if you were to apply this in your school, uh, I would want to know the progress of my kid, right? I would want to know, is he or she better than somebody else? Okay. And therefore, how successful would the next admission be as they move from one level to the other? So, how do you handle these things? And can you tell me, how do you really go through this process? Because what you're telling me, so you run a micro school. So, first, tell my audience what's a micro school, right? And then, can you walk them through what is this whole process of teaching that you do there? Because it's very important for us to understand the model of teaching that happens there.
Absolutely. So we're a micro school, as the name suggests, that it's a very small school. And that's very important because, as we said, foundational to what we do is the idea that everyone learns differently. There's no standardized path, and therefore there's no standardized assessment. But the reason this is not really taken off so far is that it's very hard to put in practice, right? Homeschoolers have done this for a long time. There are so many exceptionally gifted homeschoolers who struggled in school, who've been homeschooled because the regular pace does not make sense for them. It's at both ends of the spectrum. Once you flatten it into a spectrum, right? Someone who's struggling because they're slower, someone who's struggling because they just get bored, right? And these people have gone on to do wonderful things. They've gone to Ivy League schools. They're Nobel Prize winners as well. Who've been homeschooled. Now, conventional school, we're jumping ahead. So we're a micro school because we're saying that, so if learning has to be personalized, we have to be able to pay attention to each one. And that is very hard to do if you have a class of 40, right? So if you have, let's assume that you have a class of 40 and you have one teacher come in for a 1 hour period, right? It means that you literally can spend about a minute and a half with each kid, which actually is ridiculous if you think about it, right? So how do you understand, what that kid is struggling with. So we have this system of standardized testing, of standardized teaching to make it easier at scale. So the system is not designed for the individual. The system is designed to work at scale and throw out some individuals. And as we discussed, the idea of true positives. True positives are, so to just explain what true positives and false positives are. So you have an exam, someone's going to rank in the top 10, right? Some of them are really good, some of them happen to be ones who just absolutely mastered the art of doing well in that exam. But often we look at the ones who are really good, the true positives, and assume that the system created them. But I would say that it's despite the system, right? They would have, they happen to thrive in that system, but that doesn't mean that they would thrive somewhere else too. But I think what's interesting is to see who struggled in that system and then has finally, said this is not for me and moved out. And there's so many such success stories. And I believe that if you open up our eyes and look around, there are so many such success stories. And this is more true now, and I think this is very important for people to remember. This, especially in an Indian context, we are not talking about the India of pre-1990s, where the GDP was growing at this very anemic rate, right? So we are, so I think for the next 20 years, our GDP growth rate is going to be one of the best in the world. And this is very important even for education, because it means that we are creating a ton of opportunities for everyone. And this means that there's not a single game. It's not a zero-sum game where it's not a government job, which is literally a zero-sum game, right? So some people will get it, the others don't get that. But in the real world, if we get our systems right, if we get our institutions right, it's a non-zero-sum game. So 1,000 people play the game, 1,000 people can win it. And that's a very profound and different perspective that we have to adopt at many levels. So you mentioned how I think that we have this anxiety, hey, is my kid better than someone else? How will they rank? This is what I would call the zero-sum thing, right? It made sense for a long time, but no, it doesn't make sense anymore. What we want to say is, what are the host of skills that they have, right? Sure, we can still compare it, right? There's always, if you use a mathematical translation here, right? So if you have two kids, you rank them on 100 dimensions, they're very different. You could still flatten that down to a single number, which is what we're doing. You could still rank them, but you've thrown the baby out, and how? With the bathwater, right? So in the real world, maybe it's you flattened it out, but the things that really matter are 3 of those 100 dimensions, which this other kid who did really badly absolutely excelled at, and that's just being lost in this I think distillation, summarization process.
Okay.
So we really want to avoid that. But that, as I said, so assessment, rejecting conventional assessments does not mean that we say, hey, everything is great, let's just move through life without understanding that each kid. No, we absolutely want to make learning visible. And that's where now AI is at such a great place, even now in its evolution, to help us, right? So we are able to synthesize observations about each kid, right? So for instance, what we do in Comini, so we have, I think, 10 domains of knowledge. Within that, we have 25 different competencies across everything: fine motor skills, gross motor skills, socio-emotional well-being, critical thinking, all of these. So we are saying that we'll keep an eye on all of this, right? But we just won't reduce it to a single number. What we will have is rich observations, and then we'll be able to figure out how we can synthesize these rich observations to create a narrative.
Okay.
And why is that narrative important? Because we're saying that learning is a journey on this vast landscape, right? So we will have assessments. It's a very different kind of assessment. And what gives me hope is that I think, given where AI is, that we are able to now move to these richer assessments. Because earlier the big issue was, okay, if we have such holistic assessments for each kid, which are also subjective, how do you even go through 1 billion of these, right? It was not possible. But now it is. The world that's been opened up by AI, it is. So that is a very exciting possibility. But for us, yes. So, so we're a micro school because we think learning should be personalized. We believe the old assessments are wrong because they're too narrow, too rigid, but that doesn't mean that we reject assessments. It's that we need holistic assessments, and that's what we are aiming.
ContraMinds is a podcast dedicated to decoding people, minds, strategy, and culture. We interview and learn from high performers so that you can apply these lessons on your journey to becoming the knowledge worker athlete you were meant to be. The Contra Minds podcast is available on all leading podcast players, and if you are interested in revisiting past episodes or taking a look at our show notes from this episode, please visit us at www.contraminds.com. And now, back to the show.
So, when you talk about holistic assessment, so if I were a parent listening to this conversation, in your definition, what is holistic assessment? Can you walk us through what do you mean by holistic assessment?
Yes. So your conventional assessment would be your report card, which had 7 subjects or 8 subjects, whatever that number is, where you had a single letter or a number. That is distilling all of life down to those 7 numbers for a kid and saying this is what matters. What we're saying is, look, what also matters is the kid funny, right? Is the kid actually able to see wit and humor and things, which is interesting. We can't quantify its value right now, but we all know how that matters later on in life, right? You could be great at something, but if you're an exceptional bore as well while being exceptional with something, life is still hard to navigate, right? Whether it's in personal life or professional life. So that is one example. Along with, let's say, okay, so now let's take something like math, which we do explore with the kids, right? What does holistic assessment look with the math? The math again is a set of competencies. It's about attitudes as well. So it's not just about whether someone was able to do a set of successfully crack a certain set of questions, which is what conventional school would do. Here we look at, okay, so what was their attitude, right? How did they approach this? Now, the same problem. So, I mean, this is one of the very interesting examples given. I forget which famous mathematician it was. How do you add up numbers 1 to 100, right? Like, how do you do that? So, the famous story goes that this 8-year-old, I forget it was Gauss, realized that you could write the numbers 1 to 100. You could also write them backwards. Then you see a pattern emerges, right? When you add the first and the last number, it's 101. When you add the second and the 99 number, it's again 101. So now there's a pattern there, right? And that's a brilliant way to do this. Now there's the conventional way of doing this. There's also this, which tells you that even within math, you could approach a problem in so many different ways, some of which are exceptionally creative. But when you start grading, you lose all of this. But what we are doing is that, look, we are actually going to document the process by which someone tried to arrive at the answer. Fully understanding that it's fine if they didn't get it. That process itself is very interesting because it's a window into how they're doing that. That is holistic assessment for us.
Beautiful. So where do you get teachers? Because you really, I have seen you write saying that getting a good teacher is a treasure hunt, right? So therefore, to do something like this, you need a fundamental understanding of holistic assessment, right? So because if I'm going to teach you science, again, you're talking about holistic assessment because the way you approach the problem, the way you address the problem, the way you see the problem, you're kind of observing and actually giving them a holistic assessment, right? So given that, where do you get these teachers and how do you train these teachers and how do you prepare teachers and how do you scale this? So I've got 3 questions in this. You can answer it in multiple steps.
Yeah, I think that's a very important and the most fundamental piece of it. I think alternative schools exist but do not scale for these 2 reasons. One is finding the right set of teachers is hard. Then setting up the right training paradigm, if there's one, the right learning paradigm, putting systems around it, right? So conventional schooling, for whatever its education system, for whatever its flaws are, the system is really well oiled. So you have all the tools in place. With alternative schooling, we have to build those, and that's what we're doing too, right? So while we run a micro school, so I have a technology background, so we're actually building systems as well, right? We've built something called Zippy, which is a micro school in a box, which really enables us to run everything associated with the school, which is operational, logistics, assessments, everything. How do we personalize this, right? How do we get observations from facilitators and educators? How do we learn from them? All of that in a typical alternative school, it is done by this very exceptional set of teachers who become cultural institutions who retain all of this. But for us to be able to scale this, for us to be democratize and make this more accessible, we have to build systems. And conventional learning LMSs, for instance, so we discussed how the structural design of a classroom is so informed by the philosophy. LMSs are exactly the same. The design of an LMS is informed by the philosophy. And if the philosophy is that it's knowledge acquisition, everything is centered around that. But there are systems for it. So it's a flawed philosophy, especially given this context, this world's context. But there are systems for that. But what we have in the alternative schooling system is that we want to personalize education, but systems are few and far because no one's building this. So we are actually building that. The new age LMS, which will allow us to be personalized, flexible, and all of that. Now, coming back to teachers, how do we find them? So our belief, as the guiding metaphor for us is we have to be gentle guides on the side. Now, guides can have expertise, but expertise is not the only thing. The idea is not that we have to get them because they have this pre-acquired expertise, right? We can get them to acquire this on the job, right? So you can learn exploration on the fly. What we've seen over and over again is the most fundamental aspect is that they have to absolutely love spending time with kids, right? That is very important because a large part of the job is literally saying that, okay, I'm going to spend time with kids, learn along with them, almost be able to see the world through their perspective. And this is very important because unless you see the world through their perspective, you're not able to see the problems of the way they are. So a lot of unlearning that is required, seeing that, hey, you know what, this is the old way, but we don't have to do that, right? There's a new way to do this. So if we look at, I think the people that we work with, the people who have really excel at being educators within our small setup, is really, I'd say it's smart people who have a love for kids, and the most important thing is willing to unlearn the old things and learning along, right? The idea that we are never going to reach a stage where we say now, everything there is to know about teaching kids, and therefore we do not have to acquire anything else. It's going to be a continuous process because the world changes, kids change, everyone changes. So we have to just keep learning along, but we have to be able to keep using the experience and the expertise that we get along the way.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of people wonder, hey, they don't have degrees, but degrees come from the old perspective, right? We are rejecting the very perspective that the process of acquisition of degrees somehow equipped you to become a teacher. No, some of them obviously will end up as great teachers, but the mere fact that they have that degree doesn't mean.
Okay. So tell me, how are you building a platform for scaling this? Because it's an interesting point that you made that obviously these need to scale, right? So therefore, if this needs to scale, what's your learning platform like, and what are the ways in which you're thinking of the components of this learning platform, and how are you using technology for enabling this learning platform so that it can scale? Because it's a very, very important I would say direction that you are taking. You're almost moving almost a 180-degree opposite direction that you are taking in how we have to learn. So if you were to do that, as you rightly said, there are assets, skills, tools, methodologies which are there. So how are you building all of this as a part of this platform or technology that you're talking?
So we are building something called Zippy, which internally we call our micro school in the box. So fundamentally, our guiding North Star principle is it should enable personalized learning and allow us to have visibility into this process. So everything and anything that allows for this. Now there is the added context that we are in a world where learning resources there's an abundance of them. The world's best resources for learning anything they're now on YouTube, right? So there's channels like 3 Blue 1 Brown, which is exceptional if you want to learn any math concept. There's Veritasium for anything that's on the engineering side. You have all of those, and exceptionally engaging. So it's not about just collating these resources, right? That's the old world. So an LMS will say, okay, here are your video lectures, here are a set of...
What are the resources you said is available on YouTube? Can you repeat that once more?
The two channels that I mentioned specifically are 3 Blue, 1 Brown. That's a math channel. Then there's Veritasium. Both are super popular. Veritasium takes some interesting concepts from our world. It could be as something like, okay, so how complex is it to learn to balance a bike, for instance, right? And then really does a deep dive into that and shows us how what we take for granted actually involves a fair amount of skill and understanding, intuitive understanding of physics, for instance. 3 Blue, 1 Brown is a math channel which dives into topics like calculus. And because of their love and passion, and of course their expertise in doing this, they're exceptional. I don't think that anyone teaching this offline, the greatest teachers probably can come close, but this is, multi-sensory teaching, right? It's exceptional. This is all there. It's all out there. So our job is not to just simply curate this and say, just go ahead and go through those. It is to focus on something more fundamental, right? Where are they right now? What are their attitudes like? The attitudes toward learning become so much more important than the resources for learning. That's still there, but our management system has to say, okay, so we have to be able to finally understand where each kid is. And that requires gathering a large set of data for each kid. What are their days like? If you have a group activity, for instance, what was that activity like? What did we as facilitators learn from that? So we actually have a system where each facilitator can actually make observations about each kid, about each group activity. They can use their voice or use text. It gets automatically recorded. Then at the end of the month, the end of the year, we actually synthesize these, create holistic reports. So that's part of the system. The other part is then allowing us to plan. Now, as I said, so it's not all about letting the kids off on this vast landscape and saying, okay, just go explore, and we will be sitting. It's coming up with, we learn based on our context, right? So, for instance, no kid in India is going to be interested in baseball because baseball is non-existent. Every boy now, increasingly girl, a lot of girls are interested in cricket as well because that is our context. It's what we are exposed to. So what we're exposed to matters. So our choice then is to figure out what the kids' interests are, then find interesting things, interesting experiences that we can invite them to participate in. So that's the planning aspect, right? And the way we do that is, now this ties into some fundamental learning ideas again. Anything and everything can be explored in absolutely any level of detail, right? So if you take an apple, right? An apple is a portal into history. An apple is a portal into economics. An apple is a portal into math. An apple is a portal into color. Everything is embedded in that. You can explore all of this. So therefore, the world does not lack for things that we can get the kids to be interested in. It is more about, okay, so understanding, okay, what are they interested right now? Let's say they're very interested in music. It also happens to be the monsoons. They're interested in the rains and what's happening in the city. Tying those things together and finding activities around them. It could be worksheet-based activities. It could be science projects. It could be other things. So this requires planning, right? So every month we have a theme based on what the kids are interested in, what the facilitators think the kids would like. For instance, this month it's gardens and gardening, right? Based on what we saw the kids do. Now this again, as I said, is a portal into everything, right? So you can actually explore biology, chemistry, everything through this. The question is, what can we curate as a set of experiences? This takes a lot of work, right? So this, you can, if you're a homeschooler, you're sitting alone, the mom or dad can then spend a lot of time doing that. But the moment you have 10 kids, right, figuring out how to find something that's interesting for all of them and for a different ability levels, that's a lot of work. And we are building tools again to help with this, right? For instance, like if you have a theme idea, can we tie the theme idea with all the observations we made about our kids, with what all the competencies that we want to explore, and automatically come up with certain suggestions as to what can be done. So these are the sort of things that our system enables. So what we're doing now in the 2 years that we've been running this is to first do this manually, right? So first, okay, how do we do this? Let's do this the hard way. Then we do that and then realize, okay, these are the efficiencies that are possible in this, right? So if you're going to be able to create a theme, we know that there's a series of 15 steps.
Correct.
And 12 of those can be automated, right? That crucial step is now missing. Alternative schools are not scaled because no one has taken that step and saying that, you know what, human creativity is absolutely crucial, but there's so much that we can automate, help accelerate with the right use of technology. That's what we are enabling.
So is there a lot of underlying AI workflows, tools and assets for learning, and therefore the micro school in a box that you talk about has these kinds of things, and therefore over a period of time, this itself almost becomes like an LLM for every little micro school that you would actually scale up across the country. Is that the kind of vision that you're talking about?
Yeah, so we do not want to think too far into the distance, but absolutely yes. So the idea is if we are able to build a system that is truly meaningfully personalizable for every kid, it's automatically got scale built in because it works for just about any kid. That means that every kid can use this to find their own path. So to give you an example of how, so we use AI across the board. It's been a boon in terms of how it accelerates things. So we use a lot of board games as well, both existing board games. Big fans of board games because we spoke about, okay, how do you get kids to explore critical thinking, ambiguity, working with limited information, sometimes incomplete information. Actually, board games have all of this, right? So if you take Settlers of Catan, very popular board game. So it's about how do you use resources to get ahead in this game, right? So building settlements in cities. And it's great, it's fantastic. It just gets the kids to participate socially, think about all of these things, understand how to compete, cooperate, all of this. Now, what we also do is build our own board games, build our own card games. So we actually done three versions, three different ones. I'll give you an example of how we're using AI. So we're actually using tech and AI in the complete stack, at the philosophy level down to the practical level in terms of what we're building. We have a card game called Stitch a Story, where this is to help kids learn to read. The idea is it's a deck of cards where there are words on each card. So each kid is dealt a bunch of cards. They have to build a story with the words of these cards. And then the idea of this is that they have to remember as many of these cards as possible. So let us say you've used 10 cards, which is 10 words. You have to try and remember the story and these 10 words. And what we do is to make it hard, we have a distractor period in the middle where we say that, okay, it's sort of like, okay, if I give you a random number right now, 9745, right? You're going to remember it right away. But if I ask you to remember this after I rattle out 100 digits, it will be exceptionally hard because you'll be distracted. Yeah. Right? So we build the same into the card game mechanics. And then the idea is that they are able to use the very act of creating a narrative around these words to help make these words memorable. So that's the card game. Now, how do we use AI? We actually built these cards, built all these words, figured out all the images to go along with these words. Everything has been done with AI. So we actually built this. There's another math game that we built, which involves a flea market-like situation where kids have to, use a series of. It's not a flea market. Sorry, I think they have to feed their pets. They have to pick what pet they want to feed, and they have to go along a particular journey, pick up money to be able to do that. Now, all of these, there's one aspect which is human creativity, which is us working together and saying what are ideas that are interesting and meaningful to kids. Then, how can we quickly come up with an entire mini world around this, right? So that's us using AI. So yeah, we have these. Another one is a Spotted game. Spotted is a very cool game which actually uses a very, very interesting mathematical idea, which is that when you have a set of images or numbers or whatever it is, you can come up with a particular permutation such that any 7 of these, when you partition this, will always have one thing in common, right? And the way they've converted this into a game is, so you have two cards. One has 7 animals. The other card has 7 animals. Only one of them is common between the two. It could be a pink elephant, which is bigger on this and bigger on this. You have to spot it. You have to be the first to spot it, and you have to be able to say that out, right? It's elephant. We have created our own version of this where we have replaced this with the pictures of kids to make it more meaningful for their world, right? Again, using AI, where we're seeing that this is the idea. Let's actually create a set using this. Let's create an algorithm for this. So that is us again using AI to create learning resources. So we've done that with learning resources. We've done that with our planning tools. We are doing that with our observations. Our end of the year assessment reports actually us synthesizing about 50 to 100 observations about each kid and creating a coherent report. So using it across the board.
Fantastic. So all these over a period of time become your learning assets, and then there are assessment models and patterns that would be there, and you probably will have the background of the kids again in the system, and therefore over a period of time it could become a learning model, and you can then take it across multiple schools if you were to run it like a platform. Imagine learning as a platform, and therefore you're really looking at it using the AI, using the models, using the workflows. You're just then ensuring that if I were a teacher, I could pick up my learning assets and then apply it in the school depending on how contextually I'm looking at the kid, and therefore can I pick up my library of learning assets for the kid. That's really how you're looking at it.
Absolutely. In fact, it's very interesting that you mentioned that because we've also seen the evolution of our own thinking. When I think ChatGPT came out, I was absolutely fascinated by what it enabled. This is right around the time we started our schools, we were creating our own things. And I wrote this post, I think the title was One AI Tutor for Every Child.
Yeah.
And that actually went viral. So it was, there's a very popular tech forum called Hacker News run by Y Combinator. So it ranked number one there. It's now I think read by 20,000 people. In many ways, that led to us being funded as well. But our evolution, thinking has evolved since then, right? So when I wrote that piece, the idea was they could be a tutor for each child. But now when we looked at learning at a very deep level, what we're seeing is learning is always, especially with us, fundamentally human. So what we're doing is now what we have is a learning assistant for every facilitator. So the learning loop still is very human. It's the child and the facilitator and the parents. It's all the humans involved in this, right? With their shared context and shared culture. But this is being enabled by an AI assistant in the back. And that's what we're building. So I think, even going ahead, we will have games, we will have all of this. But for us, the focus always has to be about the child being inspired and learning along with and with a human, with a mentor and a guide, but who could in turn be assisted by this. It's like, to use a very geeky metaphor, I think it's like an Iron Man suit for your teacher.
Fantastic. Given all this, Sai, if I were to look at, probably you're doing this till say grade 3, grade 4, and I come to grade 10, and I start moving into college, and how do I ensure that I'm ready for say college, or uh, say uh, say for my masters, because there you have to somehow merge yourself to to that type of education. So how do I if you ask me, charter my path towards that, because that's the maybe that's not the end goal, but that's probably what you're really saying is that's not the end goal, because that's really not what you may want to do. But assuming that I want to do that, you've got a new education policy, there is an open school which is there. So how do you really bring all of that together to ensure that you're able to take these kids and make them successful in a world of assessment, when you start realizing that now that they have started learning so beautifully, they're able to beat the kids who actually have learned by templates, and they are actually doing better than them. So do you think that's the path that could be taken maybe in the next 5 years using this model?
Absolutely. I think that there will be a fraction or a significant fraction of the kids who go through this who will want to go down conventional paths. They want to become doctors or engineers, and then you'll have to have these assessments. What we are saying, what we are betting on, and this is again, we have a vast history of democratic schooling and unschooling and homeschooling to look at to see that this is true. And what is true is that currently we have a flip model. We're saying that whoever has gone through a conventional treadmill of assessment has become successful in the real world. We are flipping it and saying, you know what, if we equip them for the real world, and with the things we do, they will automatically pick up the necessary skills to also be able to ace these conventional exams, right? And speaking of flawed systems, I think as adults we all know that we have to live with flawed systems, right? We have to work with it, right? We all have to pay our taxes, and the tax system, and we all have our issues with that, but we still learn to navigate that. And I think that's part of becoming autonomous, having the agency to say, okay, you know what, if I really want to become a doctor, if I really want to do this, I have to go run through these hoops, and therefore I will do that. But if we flip it and say that let's just run through these hoops without even knowing what we want to do later on, I think we are taking away their agency and autonomy, which is counterproductive.
So, when you actually want to run a company like this, where do you find the talent? Because the technology mindset is very different because you're asking them to work from the first principles, right? So, therefore, where do you find the talent? How do you, groom the talent? And you're a funded startup, so therefore, clearly, how do you really, what principles do you follow for hiring? What principles do you follow for grooming? And how do you see this organization, moving from a startup to a scale-up?
So as a startup, I think there are certain trade-offs which are in our benefit, which is that we can be very slow in our hiring because we're growing slowly. We don't have to hire 100 people each week. We have a very small team, and we use the exact same philosophy, right? We do not care about their degrees. In fact, that is something we state upfront. And the way we do our assessments is actually give them something to work on, something meaningful that is related to what they would end up doing. So if it's a design project, for instance, for our curriculum design, we had someone who's working with us actually design a board game and we craft it in such a way that it does not take too much time. It's not too trivial, but also not something that will soak up a month of their life. And that is because we're saying that, look, the only way you can actually tell if someone is right for this work is to actually have them do this work. No other proxy works, right? Their degrees don't matter, none of these matter. And that's easier to do with technology. We can create interesting problems. This is something, in fact, we've been doing for a long time. So when I first started running a startup, this was 10 years back, 12 years back. I moved back to India, I worked here for a bit. So I didn't really have a network. So what I did was created coding puzzles and actually advertise them nationally. So Facebook was much cheaper, and I think our first 10 hire, in fact, every single hire was someone who discovered us through those puzzles, solved those puzzles, and joined us. One of them is now the CTO of a company elsewhere. He's easily the most exceptional person I've worked with. I think he failed out of college. He not even completed his degree. He worked for a couple of weeks, I think, at Infosys, and he felt like he was sucking the soul out of his life when he saw our ad, and he immediately applied and cracked that, and he joined us. So that's the sheer talent of India now being an advantage in some ways, right? We have so many people who, for many reasons, have not succeeded in the conventional pathway because, as we said, right, that's flawed. So even now among our colleagues, so we have someone who has 20. I forget the term, what that is. Basically, he's failed 20 subjects. He's tried to take them again, but an exceptional talent when it comes to the work, right? And for us, it's about hiring for this work and not based on what they've done. Now, how do we do that at scale? I think it's doable. In fact, if you look at companies like Google, so they, of course, now Google has other issues with their hiring recruitment process. They do these 7 rounds, and whiteboarding, which again is a bad thing in tech interviews. But a lot of them will innovate in different ways. And typically all of it comes along with this, right? Rather than trying to assess them based on proxies, like degrees, or where they worked, or which school they graduated from, just try to get a sense of what their actual work output is. And then there are the other things like, okay, they have to believe in the philosophy of what we're doing, and gel with the team, all of that. So we've been lucky so far, but also given that we're small and we've scaled slowly, I think that's worked so far. But as we go along, we'll have to figure out how we innovate and create larger scale initiatives.
So, looking, say, a couple of years ahead, if you're scaling up this model, so do you see a lot of micro schools, Comini micro schools, as hubs and spoke that are there, and a lot of, uh, I would say, teachers who come out of an academy of Comini Academy? And do you see as that as a business model as you're moving forward? Because I would love Comini to succeed given the fundamental philosophy that you have, which I believe is very, very important, because you're moving from a craft age to an industrial age and back to a craft age, right? So given that situation that we are in, what's the business model, and how do you see this panning out?
We would love for there to be tons of micro schools. That's already happening in the US. How that happens in India, we have to see. The new educational policy is more flexible. Systems are always very hard to change. Often change has to come from the outside. And then I think that change is right now at our doorstep in terms of what AI is doing. AI is rapidly eroding so many models of education. Colleges in the US are just wondering what to do with their take-home essays which they've been giving to grade kids, because now the ChatGPT will put that together. They're thinking that there'll be AI detection tools, but that's just nonsense. That's not going to happen. The point being that I think that change is required, but change is always tough because systems are so stable in their equilibrium, even if it's flawed, till some external force rushes in. That's happening now, and I think that will create a great, splintering in our system. It would be amazing if we had a lot of micro schools. We have to figure out how we enable that. But that's a challenge in India. It's not as easy as elsewhere, because we have our own unique set of challenges. So Bombay is ridiculously expensive when it comes to real estate, and for private education, we have to have a model where we are renting space or we own our space, right? And that becomes a significant
Cost.
part of your fee structure cost. So we have to figure out how to work around that. But and scale has helped for this as well, right? So typically you do scale because scale always means efficiency. The question is, where is the efficiency?
Correct.
Scale is coming in terms of efficiency, in terms of economics and everything else, but not in terms of efficiency for the child's learning, right? So here, this is a harder, challenge, but people are doing interesting things. So Dr. Aniruddha Malpani, who is an investor, he runs something called Apni Pathshala, which they've set up, 50 to 100 pods, small pods around India now, where they're saying that, look, you know what, there's an abundance of learning solutions. So let's just give kids access to computers, right? Let's put them on the autonomous path. So there are micro schools, and that's a very interesting one.
He was on our podcast.
Oh, really? Okay. And I think that's a very interesting initiative. So there are going to be micro schools, and I think that is going to accelerate. The whole splintering of our schooling system is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. What happens at the end of it, how much of that is going to be micro schools, we'll have to see.
Great. On that note, let me ask you the last set of rapid fire questions. So my first question to you is, what does success mean to you?
Success means that we have been able to, in a professional setting, carve out a space for this new way of learning, new way of personalized learning. That people believe in this idea that greater numbers come around seeing that, okay, this can work, this can actually work. That's what it is.
Fantastic. So if I were a 18-year-old in a university today, what would be your advice to that 18-year-old?
Get to the real world as quickly as possible. Figure out how you can get to the real world, whether that's getting an internship, a job, figuring out how to go out. I think that's the most important. It's very funny. So I was recently reading that IIT Bombay has undergraduates who are not placed, and for me that is, I think, to have gone through that system for 18 years and to not be equipped enough to find your own way in the real world, if you're not giving them that, then what's the point? So so I tell any 18-year-old out there, just find your path to the real world as quickly as possible.
Fantastic. What is one piece of advice that you have received? You may have received a lot, but one that has remained till today, which you continue to apply and probably remember. What's that piece of advice that you believe, that you remember and really value?
This is something someone told me I think, fairly recently, but it resonates with me because of my own inclination, that it is fine to get something to a perfectly acceptable level rather than getting it to perfection. I think that perfection is illusory. And especially given what we're doing, I think that this resonates a lot, both at a personal level and at the level of the work we're doing. That no one knows what is the ideal world or the perfect world, right? It's important to do something, put it out there, understand what the reaction to that and the feedback to that is. So yes, perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable over perfection.
Beautiful, beautiful. What are the couple of books that you recommend? That you've been inspired by. So, can you name a couple of them which you believe the audience can really learn from, and which can make an interesting new perspective for them?
So I mentioned Phantoms in the Brain, which is now an old book, but one of my favorites. Journey of the Mind, our book. I'm biased, but I do think that it is the best introduction to neuroscience you'll find. But it was inspired by a book called Vehicles by someone called Valentino Greenberg. It's an old book again, perhaps a bit outdated, but a book I've loved, and clearly it lingered enough for us to make it the model for Journey of the Mind. In terms of recent books, if I just go through the list, I read something by Vikram Chandra, who's an Indian author who's written Red Earth and Pouring Rain. He has a very lovely book about code and programming, right? So he's someone, I didn't know this, he's someone who's actually funded his life as a writer by actually working as a programmer on the side. So he has a very interesting perspective into the intersection of code and writing. And so another book which I read, which I happen to remember now, is a very recent book by Shashi Tharoor on Ambedkar. So Ambedkar, I think, is one of the he's obviously well known, and after Gandhi, probably has the second most number of statues. But in terms of his body of work, it's like what it's done for India, I think it needs to be celebrated so much more. And this book actually helped me realize in many ways how much it's done. Both his book, and I think there's a book by Arundhati Roy, Gandhi and Ambedkar.
Fantastic. Beautiful, beautiful. Thanks a lot. If you were to invite a couple of people for a dream dinner, they could be alive or dead, who would you invite and why?
Very interesting. Daniel Dennett comes to mind. He passed away recently. Legendary philosopher, a masterful coiner of phrases, but also someone who made philosophy, I think, very accessible to so many. I think that would be someone. I'm wondering if there's anyone in the technology field that I would. The saying "never meet your heroes" comes to my mind.
Great.
So
fantastic. So, what's one piece of advice? What is one piece of belief that you really have, which others really don't agree with you?
That we are in a non-zero sum world. I think the very phrasing itself is a little abstract, so perhaps a little hard for people to get. But I feel like that's a very profound and important thing for us, everyone to remember, right? That there's always something out there that you can find your path and peace in, and especially now more than ever. So we're fortunate to live in the age we are, despite all the flaws, despite all the risks and dangers. So I don't think people truly appreciate that.
Brilliant. So thanks, Sai. It was a lovely conversation. I didn't realize the time that went by, and it was really, really beautiful the way you explained learning, the way you explained how education is changing and how education ought to be delivered in this new age. So all the best to you, and really looking forward to being in touch. And thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's absolutely been a pleasure. I'm happy to be able to talk about what we're doing. And I realized that as we were talking, there's often thoughts that are inside but have not really been articulated. And the process of articulating them also really helps. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to this episode. For selected links and detailed show notes, visit
www.contraminds.com. Follow ContraMinds on social media and let us know who you would like to see next on the podcast. If you're listening to ContraMinds on Apple Podcasts, do share your comments and give us a rating. We are keen to know what you're thinking. ContraMinds is also on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and stay up to date on all our releases. Thanks for listening and stay safe.